back, folks, to episode 89 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what I'd like to discuss today on this lovely Sunday afternoon is something along the lines of meaning. Now, meaning is something that if we think of things objectively, for instance, things that we can concretely touch and say that there is a reference for the word that we may be thinking or speaking, for instance, out in the world, such as a sofa or a book or a chair, this sort of thing. We also have the subjective aspect that has to do with not only those things that are brought about by thought, that is a thought process, or something we entertain as a result of process of mind, but also something that lends meaning. And meaning is one of the things that we're moving towards since the last podcast, having to do with our imagination captured, like the book by Elias Dakwar. And The Captive Imagination is an amazing read. And it's on audiobook, by the way. I would suggest you get that. It's a really good book. But the fact is, we are moving towards the idea of meaning and the impact of what meaning has relative to what we call our lives, and also those things that we get addicted to. Not just talking about drugs per se, but the fact that we're hedonic creatures and we have a reward pathway that gives us pleasure chemicals, dopamine being the primary one that motivates action and repetition of action. But what we're going to be discussing once again is meaning and how that impacts what it is that we call our life drivers, those things that are motivators, also those things that we can become addicted to or severely dependent, such that we feel a fear of loss whenever we don't have them. So with that, we'll go and launch the discussion about meaning. So meaning, generally speaking, when we're discussing words and language and syntax and also context, we have to understand that there is a certain assumed agreement as to what certain words mean. Some of these words can be incredibly powerful, and I'm going to recite a couple of very simple ones, and they all start with the letter S. And I want us to keep this in mind as we move towards the end of this discussion, because they're going to become much more pronounced in effect, and also it hopefully will help us understand more effectively when people do describe what their pains are to us, if they're trying to lean on us, this sort of thing, or even trying to describe what's going on whenever they feel that they don't have a way to get away from or get out of said addiction or dependence, for instance. And once again, we're not just discussing drug dependence and addiction science per se, but rather just the fact that we're human, and those things that drive us are hedonic responses, and we condition ourselves to do those things that bring us those good feelings that say, hey, I'm still alive, I'm still here. And from that perspective, the human perspective, let us give you those words. The first one's going to be suggestion. Suggestion is something that I've spoken about on this podcast several times, because we can suggest, and this is something that is a process of thinking and words, but also sometimes without words, our body language can suggest or imply something that may be occurring. I can be suggesting in your presence, if I'm too close to you, that maybe I like you or dislike you, or maybe that I'm encroaching upon you and I could be a threat without speaking. But also suggestion could be implying something by one's words, or even saying something that may be not out of context, but may be related, but yet is injected into something to bring about that thought process. So therefore I suggest the possibility of it, maybe not a probability, but a possibility, and that's enough for it to become one of those little back burner concerns that may burn in your mind whenever you're not wanting to think about it. So suggestion is the first one. The next one is seduction. Seduction, not necessarily in the sexual sense that is often thrown about in the public eye, but it does encompass that. But whenever something becomes attractive to us, and this is salesmanship, it appears, is providing an opportunity for somebody to see something that they may want, but also encouraging the person to want it more than what would be normal, beyond a utilitarian practical sense. I need a light bulb. Okay, what's so sexy about that? Well, depending on how they sell it, they could sell the seduction aspect relative to some sort of physical or emotional thing that we could get as a result of using that light bulb, and that's marketing. Nothing new there, but once again, seduction. Keep this in mind once again. And the next one is sanctuary. What is it that is sanctuary? Sanctuary is a safe place, but it's also a place that one may hide, one may reside, one may recover and heal in the sense of sanctuary. Whenever somebody has political sanctuary, one is running from and seeking safety from a country that one may defect from. Also, when we seek sanctuary, let's say in a religious spiritual sense, often we might go, whether to be a temple or a cathedral or a church, where we can go and be alone with ourselves and seek dominion. And that's an important thing. So sanctuary is the next term. After this is solution. Solution is very related to the other terms when we put it together within this idea of what it is that I may be seeking whenever I'm, let's say, angry, anxious, hungry, tired, sleepy, bored. Whenever we're bored, we seek novelty. That is a solution of sorts, in the sense that the novelty term isn't the solution, but rather what I seek that is new and neat. When I become bored with what usually I enjoy, but something is like, this isn't working for me as well. Maybe I've become saturated, so to speak, with the behavior, and therefore I don't get the kick of dopamine that I used to get. Often we see this with new video games. Wherever video games would come out, some people would go sell them so they could get money to buy the new ones. And we see this in a more common sense today. The next term, once again, we discovered solution, is suffering. So what is my suffering? Suffering is a very physical thing. It can also be a mental, emotional thing. Whenever we're discussing physical suffering, when somebody has a continuous chronic pain, that is suffering of sorts. But often we relate what we think as suffering as something that is considerably tied to how we interpret what's happening to us. So, can you have pain and not suffer? Yes, you can have pain and not suffer. When we suffer is when we start thinking that I have pain and I don't deserve it. I have pain and I start thinking things like it'll never go away. I want it to go away. What can I do to stop it? I don't want to hurt like this. And we start trying to run from it and maybe don't have the way to get away from it. So that doesn't increase the pain, in the sense that pain becomes worse, in the sense that one could, in a subjective unit of distress scale, say I had a 10, now it's an 11. Well, with the subjective, we may make it seem that, and we do know that the mind does have an effect, and we become more sensitized to things. So to say it doesn't really increase pain would be marginally incorrect. But as far as in actual physical pain, will I increase it by thinking it's worse than it is? Not necessarily. But if I start generally feeling unwell about the whole situation, my body starts to respond to that. It starts to believe that. And this is the direction that we're going with those terms. So the terms were suggestion, seduction, solution, and suffering. We started this discussion with the term meaning, and often the words that we speak to each other and ourselves in our most intimate, uh, isolated, and solipsistic way of doing things, whenever it's just about me, uh, have a lot of influence on what it is that will come into our life, one, but also those things that we allow to repeatedly come into our lives, such as food. We need to eat regularly, drink regularly, work, and also other influences, such as those things that would help us unwind and alleviate anything that we consider stressful or painful or even uncomfortable, in the sense that I feel like I've had to endure 8 or 9 hours of worth of work and this machine is screeching and I just need something to help me relax, this sort of thing. We may start reaching for things that become solutions for what it would be as far as pain, discomfort, anxiety, but we want stuff that works quickly. We know that sometimes we might reach for substances. Some people will start playing video games just to zone out. Some will exercise, this sort of thing, but we might seek to solve the problem that is the discomfort that I might carry with me. And I may not be in it anymore, but my opinion of it and the feelings I have of it and the thoughts that loop and ruminate and go over and over these things, we tend to obsess and compulse a little bit about what we do when that comes up and what we think, the obsessive thought. And we don't want to let it go because at some level we might feel entitled We might feel offended. We might feel like I don't deserve this. And we wish for another way or a way out. And we start problem solving. And problem solving doesn't always arrive at a solution that is best for us, but it's effective in most cases. Effective, once again, I've defined before, is on or off, one or two, black or white. Either it works or it doesn't. Pretty simple. And soon enough, we start using the term efficiency. That has to do with how quickly can I get it, how effectively does it work, and if it's effective, turn it off, turn it on. How can I efficiently, the least amount of effort on my part, maintain this feeling of lack of stress that I may have gotten from job, and therefore creating not only a solution, but a regularity and consistency in that solution. So whenever we're dealing with things along the lines of an addiction, to substances. Often the substances that we become addicted to weren't the goal, they were the solution. The goal was relief, and we get stuck and often get hooked on things that weren't the initial goal in the first place. So the solution was one of the first things that I was seeking, but not necessarily the addiction to what I was using to solve the problem. What does that have to do with suggestion? Well, suggestion is one thing that tells you something may seem or look like a certain way or might imply a certain outcome that may or may not come. So, what's a suggestion that I'm giving myself whenever I start solving regularly such that I become dependent on a substance or behavior or a thing or a certain ritualized thing that I do over and over to make sure that I relieve that discomfort that I'm feeling that I've acquired due to, let's say, working a job that's really uncomfortable, for instance? Well, the suggestion is that I don't have a way to solve that in another way. And the efficiency means it takes less effort versus going to the gym and lifting weights, sometimes picking up a doob of marijuana and smoking that, or smoking on a pipe or a cigarette, or taking a sip of alcohol, this sort of thing. It takes a whole heck of a lot of effort, less effort in comparison to be able to do a 1 ounce curl versus having to curl 30 pounds in the gym. It's a hard sell, especially if we're already tired. So that being the case, what is the suggestion? That ease means I win somehow. I've conserved energy. Nature does what? Nature is a natural conservator of energy. We are natural conservators of energy. So therefore, we have this potential for complacency and laziness. And the solipsistic, it's about me perspective is that how can I relieve the amount of effort required? How can I become more effective at turning stuff off the pain more efficiently, least amount of effort, and save energy for whatever it is I'm going to do later? And that is where the suggestion becomes no longer is the solution within me, but also I might have to seek outside of me. And then I start creating these ideas, these fictions, these perspectives that if I don't have this substance or whatever, or this behavior or whatever, I can't relieve myself of this discomfort. I have foregone literally the possibility of me using my capacity and whatever other tools or skills I might have to deal with it, because in light of effort being a little more excessive at the gym, I'm going to save energy and do it with less and do it quicker by just pouring myself a 1 ounce shot. There we go. And that's it. In comparison, the effort is what I'm looking at. I'm really trying to conserve energy. That's part of the suggestion. That is a subtext, if anything, within the suggestion. I'm not only saving energy, but also I don't have the solution inside of myself. And we discuss solution and suggestion. So the next part is my sanctuary. What is my sanctuary? Whenever I start having this consistent dogging pain, discomfort, or irritation, or feel like many people call this soul sucking work, where there's repetition, there's effort, and there's exhaustion. We seek relief, we seek respite, sanctuary, if you will, from those things that are out in the world that we call the world in quotes. That becomes part of our fiction. It becomes part of the story that I'm struggling out there, mindlessly doing this work, soul sucking labor, painstaking effort, and I'm doing nothing but making money for the man, and I'm getting paid a marginal income, and I go back and do this every day, and it's considered a slave wage or slavish job, and that is this all I've got? Notice the story that I told. That is the narrative above what I'm actually doing. This is the fiction. It is not the world against. It is not just making money for the man, this sort of thing. There's an agreement that goes there, but we forget that I chose to be there. And we lose a little bit of our autonomous quality within the narrative, making us feel like a victim, feel victimized. And we paint ourselves in the victim's mindset and perspective. And we're telling the story of the victim. And the narratives are incredible. This isn't invalidating anything. What I'm doing is breaking down how this happens, what it looks like, so we can not only understand others, but understand ourselves. What goes on with that? It's an important thing. So, what is it that I'm experiencing whenever I have solution, relief? Whenever I have that suggestion, an idea that says I don't have to waste energy. And then sanctuary, I have a safe place, somewhere where I can get away and be away and stop that negative suggestion that's occurring and increasing my ability to relax and to get my mind off of those things that are so uncomfortable. So the next term after suffering is subjective meaning. And that has to do with the words, once again, the narrative, how I describe things, the story I've told, and the story I tell myself and the one that I speak to others. Sometimes when we speak a narrative, when we tell our story, we want it to be correct. And we usually will tell people all the things that have to do with the discomfort and how I solve and how I get away, how I escape, and also the plight that I experience. We may even be a little hyperbolic and exaggerating certain things because the only way we can describe the depth of my visceral experience of what I am experiencing that's so darned uncomfortable is by our language. And what do? We stretch our language. We exaggerate a little bit. Things, whenever spoken and described, aren't always as they are, but rather in our minds as they're spoken, as they're painted. And imagination is the big thing. This is the next part, the imaginative, the captive imagination, the visual, the imaginal, the daydreaming quality that sometimes when we ruminate, we see the events, we see the place, we see things, but we don't see them clearly nor perfectly. But we tend to hyper-focus on things, not unlike post-traumatic stress disorder, where we remember things, but specific things become more exaggerated in the memory, and they become a distortion of sorts. And then they start getting generalized to other things. And this is what we start seeing amotivational qualities, not unlike with marijuana extensive use, certain people get very uh, demotivated and don't have a sense of urgency to do those things that are important. And if they can do what they need to do to make themselves feel good often, and this isn't all, mind you, this is a broad brushstroke here. Wherever we see, and it's not just marijuana, by the way, it can be people using video games now or other behavioral issues that get in the way, wherever we get stuck doing behavior, just trying to basically please ourselves and setting that reward pathway trigger off every chance we get. And to use the term mental masturbation is something that people often use as a pejorative, but in essence, this is kind of what things become. There is a way to where there's no productive at the end, not making a child, but rather making an outcome that is solid, but rather what we're getting as the outcome is just mere relief. And sometimes those irritations are the things that help us step to the next level, to create more, do more, and to seek those things that would be new, novel, healing, satisfying, and freeing from those things that would be our day-to-day grind, so to speak, if we can put it in that context and term. So for now, I want us to think about these things. What are the things that drive me? What are the things that I say? And are they absolutely factually accurate, or are they subjective exaggerations? This doesn't mean that whenever you have pain, you shouldn't be talking about it like it's more what it is. Sometimes by speaking the narrative, we do get relief, not invalidating that. Please keep talking with each other. But what I'm wanting you to do is, as a self-regulatory skill, become aware of what it is that I do with my internal speak. What is it that I use as a solution for my pain? What do I do whenever I suggest to myself that the only solution I have is what I have in hand versus seeking another? Are there other solutions out there? What is my sanctuary? Where do I find sanctuary? Do I have sanctuary with myself, within myself, a place that I go to seek that peace and solvency of stress, hopefully? And what's next is, where do I have something that's a dependence where I feel like I get sanctuary by leaning on someone else? And that's okay too, just as long as it's not a codependent thing. It's healthy. That's cool. But I want us to think about these things. It's about standing on your own too when you must, but at the same time knowing that even if we lean on somebody, it is what we speak that often guides us to determine whether or not we have, once again, these suggestions saying that I only have solutions outside of myself, or if I have a solution, that this is the only one. And the seduction sometimes is to be able to continue to do that and not find other ways, because if it feels good and it works really well, often we may narrow our search or even have this self-confirming bias that we develop that has evidence of feeling and history of use, of effective use no less, that might keep us from extending ourselves or trying something new, learning something new, or finding something else to do, or even a different solution for that matter. And suffering. We all suffer. The thing is, whenever we're here, our opinions are what make our pain suffering. How we interact and interpret the meaning that we give to things, whether it be factual, actual, versus a hyperbolic exaggeration, will determine whether or not what we see is suffering. And how much we suffer is determined often by how much our interpretation is exaggerated sometimes. Now, this isn't talking about physical pain, but it is something that can make the endurance of physical pain a lot worse if we feel like the world's caving in on us. And part of it might be our expectation or prediction that, well, it is. And here's the evidence. We can't follow our personal algorithms all the time. Sometimes it requires us to speak to others. And I say it that way because, as an example, Google, if you look up something and you have a certain perspective on things, you'll find umpteen things to support the fact that, yes, it is that way. And we'll be less apt to find the opposing view. Because look at all this evidence that supports mine, but there's a world of evidence that also supports the other perspective, but we won't look for it because we have that bias being supported by, now, in quotes, evidence. I certainly appreciate you sharing your Sunday afternoon with me today, and I certainly look forward to hearing from more of you folks. I've had quite a few people reach out, and I appreciate it. I've had a few offers, and we're moving towards phase 2, where I may be doing some interviews. I'm not sure when I'm going to get the equipment to be able to do that effectively, but that is part of the goal, the phase 2 of Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project. It is growing. For those of you that have been following on YouTube, thank you. I appreciate you. You've actually shown me quite a few good views, and I am happy with that. And this is a small podcast, but we have some global listeners, and I am grateful for each and every one of you. And if you have any feedback or just want to reach out and say hello, please do. And you can send that to the email at runningmangetskillsproject@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to hear from you. And for now, take care. Walk well.